Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the DOE Request for Information listening session on the hydroelectric incentives programs under EPA or the EPACT 2005, Section 243 and 247. I'm Luciana Ciacci, Stakeholder Engagement Lead for the Hydroelectric Incentives Program, and will be facilitating today's session. We have Maria Robinson, Director of the Grid Deployment Office, joining us this afternoon for opening remarks. Tim Welsh, Program Manager for the Hydro Incentives Program, will provide an overview of the two programs and the request for information, and we'll proceed with your feedback and next steps and closing remarks. Maria, thank you for joining us today. I'll now pass the stage over to you for opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Luciana, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. This is my first time speaking in front of many of you as the director of the newly formed Grid Deployment Office, better known colloquially as the GDO. And we're really excited to be the new home of the Hydroelectric Incentives Program, sorry. I come out of many years of working in the clean energy industry. Most recently, I was actually an elected official in Massachusetts and looking to engage with all of you as we continue to work to meet President Biden's goals for both 2030 and 2050. One of the things that we're really excited about here, of course, is the bipartisan infrastructure investment law. And over the next 5 years, the bipartisan infrastructure law is going to stand up over 60 new programs across the Department of Energy, which includes 16 demonstration programs and 32 deployment programs. And it's expanding funding for about 12 existing RD&D programs. So it's a really exciting time to be here at the department. As you all know, this is not anything new, but hydropower facilities currently supply about 6% of all electricity in the United States and account for just under a third of all renewable electricity generation in the country. And most importantly, hydroelectric power accounts for about 93% of all current utility scale energy storage, making sure that power is there when customers need it. And hydropower has been providing renewable energy for well over 100 years. Of course, again, because our fleet is aging, many existing plants require significant upgrades, either to become more efficient or to become better integrated with new and existing renewable energy sources. The Grid Deployment Office here is going to oversee the investment of more than $750 million in existing hydropower facilities to improve efficiency, maintain dam safety, reduce environmental impacts, and ensure generators continue to provide emission-free electricity. And in order to do this, we had to reorganize our workforce slightly. So you may see that these programs are moving throughout the department a little bit. DOE has gone through a large-scale realignment in order to emphasize the fact that the bipartisan infrastructure law and hopefully the Inflation Reduction Act will have long-lasting impacts, truly a transformational investment in clean energy. And it's going to propel the entire innovation and commercialization life cycle from the discovery science that happens, that underpins all of our work, up through market proliferation of clean energy solutions. So on the next slide that we show here, it's a new organizational chart that we've got here. And back in February, you might have heard that the department as a whole announced a new Undersecretary for Infrastructure, which is focusing on all sorts of clean energy infrastructure, whether it's large deployment or demonstration projects. And we, the GDO, are located here in the department in that nice little red circle there. Separately, the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation is focusing on fundamental sciences, clean energy innovation, and the department's core R&D missions across a ton of existing programs and the 17 national labs. The Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, EERE, includes the Water Power Technology Office with much of DOE's hydropower work. So there are strategic efforts that are happening here to work to seamlessly align the department's work across offices to really accelerate commercialization of key clean energy technologies, including hydropower, from early stage research to market liftoff. So we here at the Grid Deployment Office are investing more than $17 billion across all of our programs to ensure resilience of critical power generation facilities, to improve and expand high capacity electric transmission lines and distribution systems nationwide, and to improve all grid resilience work that is happening across the country. So the main tenets of our office include enhanced transmission planning. Of course, a successful transmission network requires deliberate planning, new and innovative approach to supporting our changing energy mix and our increasing electrification needs. We have a number of federal financing tools that provide additional options for financing investment, both loans and grants, in clean power generation, grid resilience, grid modernization, and transmission deployment, more funding than ever before. And a significant amount of federal collaboration where we're developing a modern electric grid capable of meeting all of our electrification needs. And that's going to be a large scale, holistic effort. And of course, importantly for today's webinar and conversation, the Power Generation Assistance Project, which is going to leverage federal funding to maintain both hydropower and nuclear facilities. So this hydroelectric incentives program that's going to oversee the $750 million for existing hydropower facilities I mentioned earlier is going to live under this Grid Deployment Office. And we're so fortunate to have incredible leadership amongst our team here. Many of you know and love Tim Welch, who's here today to review two of our GDO's main funding provisions. Provision 40332, which is the hydroelectric efficiency improvement incentive, what we would call Section 243 from EPAC 2005, which is a total of $75 million in incentive payments to owners or operators of existing hydroelectric facilities who may apply for funding in order to make capital improvements, and we'll talk about what capital improvements means, that can increase efficiency by at least 3%. The second provision, of course, is 40333, which is maintaining and enhancing hydroelectricity incentives, the 247 provisions out of EPAC 2005, which is going to provide a whopping $553.6 million in incentive payments to enhance our existing hydropower facilities through capital improvements directly related to three main areas: grid resiliency, which is a major aspect, especially here now that this program is living under the Grid Deployment Office, dam safety, of course, and environmental improvements. So bottom line is we're here today to help fund these capital improvement projects that will make hydropower facilities more energy efficient and resilient, and such an important part of our grid infrastructure. So I want to thank all of you for being here today, taking time out of your lives to take part in this really important session. Your expertise, your participation are truly critical to the success of these programs. We look forward to hearing your feedback. We really appreciate all of your candid thoughts here today. And I just want to thank you so much for being here. Now I believe we'll turn it back over to Tim.
Thank you, Maria, and a warm welcome to the Department of Energy and also to the hydropower community. So I'm going to briefly go through and give you a high-level overview of the two provisions, the EPAC 2005 hydro incentive provisions that is the subject of not only our RFI, but on our listening session today. And so here's the broad overview, and the first one, which is not a subject of our listening session today, is many of you know, is the Section 242 program, which is adding power to non-power dams and generation to existing facilities. That program has been in existence since 2014, and but it was funded to the tune of $125 million by the Infrastructure bill. So because we already have the guidance for the 242 hydropower production incentives, it's not a subject of this webinar nor of the RFI. So the two sections that we are going to be talking about today is Maria mentioned earlier, section 243, improving the existing hydropower facility efficiency, which was funded by the infrastructure bill to the tune of about $75 million. And a brand new section 247, maintaining and enhancing existing hydropower through the grid resiliency, dam safety, and environmental improvements, which was funded by the infrastructure bill of approximately $554 million. Again, 242 and 243 are extensions of programs that were previously authorized in the original EPAC 2005, and 247 is a brand new program. Next slide. Okay, let's get into some of the details. So section 243, the hydroelectric efficiency improvement incentive programs, is improving generation efficiency by at least 3%. It was enacted in the original EPAC 2005, as I mentioned, but unfunded until now. The maximum percentage of federal funds to the capital improvement was raised by the infrastructure bill from 10 to 30%, and the total cap was raised from $750,000 to a total or a cap of $5 million per project. And this was funded for $75 million starting here in fiscal year 2022 to remain available until expended. So here's the brand new program, 247, maintaining and enhancing electricity incentives. Now, what are the qualifying facilities? Now, the qualifying facilities here are those non-federal facilities that have a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license and placed in service before the enactment of this section, or there's a grandfather clause pursuant to a permit or valid existing right-of-way granted prior to June 10th, 1920, which predates the Federal Power Act. Now, this funding should not exceed 30% of the costs of the applicable capital improvement, and not more than $5 million to any facility in any fiscal year. The total here is $553,600,000 to remain available until expended. So, as Maria mentioned, section 247, the projects that we will be seeking will fall under three broad categories: improving grid resiliency, improving dam safety, and environmental improvements. So let's get into each one of them in a little bit more detail. Now, here are the subtopics under each of those main topics. For improving grid resiliency, we'll be looking for applications that allow projects to adapt more quickly to changing grid conditions, provide ancillary services, integrate other variable sources of electricity generation, such as wind and solar, and can manage accumulated reservoir sediments, which really goes to increased storage in reservoirs. Dam safety. Dam safety includes maintenance and upgrade of spillways, dam stability improvements, including erosion repair and enhanced seepage controls, and upgrades or replacements of floodgates or natural infrastructure restoration. Next. Here we go. Brian. Okay, here we go. So finally, environmental improvements. First one is adding or improving fish passage, improving water quality, promoting downstream sediment transport processes and habitat maintenance, and finally, improving recreational access, particularly to reservoirs. So here are the four categories, subcategories on environmental improvements. Okay, so let's get to the subject of today's webinar. So on June 30th, we released the request for information seeking help in establishing guidance for implementing the two programs that I just previously mentioned, sections 243 and 247, that were funded by the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So this guidance, what will it do? So it will help us interpret the statutory provisions, first of all, and set forth requirements for future incentive payments. How will we evaluate the applications that we receive? And so again, the responses will assist us in establishing draft guidance for these two provisions, but we will release the draft guidance for public comment prior to finalizing it for the first solicitation. So this webinar will not be the last time you hear from us on this thing. So what does the RFI look like? So it includes a total of 38 questions under these general categories. First of all, a general area, questions particularly regarding what is the definition of capital improvement. In the RFI, we put forth a definition that we put together based on various sources, and we're looking for your comments on that particular definition. Now, under 243, we're asking questions about the program designs. What are eligible efficiency improvements? Because there could be more than just working with the powertrain. And how do we validate those efficiency improvements? Section 247, again, program design, a real important area, prioritization and distribution of funds, especially among the general, the three categories that I mentioned. We also include questions under these last two areas about equity, environmental, and energy adjusted labor priorities. And finally, we ask some questions about how does this provision help expand union jobs and ensure an effective workforce development. Okay. So how do you respond to the RFI? Well, we've really come up with 3 different ways. Overall, we have a 60-day comment period that will end September 6, 2022. And the first way is to written and oral responses are being accepted. So the first way is to sort of do it the general way, which is writing your response. The second way is an oral response in a couple of different ways. First of all, for today's listening session, which provides you an opportunity to provide responses in a group setting and hear feedback from other members of the community. But we're also providing an opportunity to speak directly to our staff here at the DOE. And we're asking for requests for a 30-minute verbal response with a DOE staff member, but we must receive that request by 5 p.m. by Friday, August 19th, 2022. And this gives you an email address where you can submit your request for your 30-minute session with DOE staff. And finally, again, written responses to the RFI must be submitted electronically to this particular address, wpto.rfi@ee.doe.gov by no later than 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, September the 6th. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn things back over to Luciana Ciacci, and we will then begin our public inputs.
Okay, thank you. We'd like to cover a couple of logistical items for today's feedback session. So the purpose of today's meeting is to ask for your input regarding the DOE request for information on the hydroelectric incentive programs under EPAC 2005, sections 243 and 247. To that end, it would be most helpful to us that you provide us, based on your personal experience, your individual advice, information, or facts regarding this topic. It is not the objective of this session to obtain any group position or consensus. Rather, the Department of Energy is seeking as many recommendations as possible from all individuals at this meeting to most effectively use our limited time. Please refrain from passing judgment on other participants' recommendations or advice, and instead concentrate on your individual experiences. Next slide, please. So this webinar will be recorded and made available to registrants after. If you have technical issues, try calling into the webinar via phone. Attendees that pre-registered to make 2-minute general statements will speak first within each topic. Public comments will then be taken in order of raised hands. If you'd like to provide feedback, please raise your hand using the Zoom function. DOE will review and consider all responses in its formulation of program strategies for the identified materials of interest that are the subject of this request. And now we will move on to category 1 within the RFI. So at this point, the chat box is open. We welcome comments in the chat. They will be aggregated at the conclusion of the listening session. However, we will not be responding to questions in the chat during the listening session. And also, please remember to mute your microphone. Okay, thanks. So for category 1, we will be moving directly within the public feedback period. Category 1 focuses on defining capital improvements, timing of funds, as well as collaboration with FERC. So at this time, we will open it up to public feedback. Please raise your hand again to provide feedback, and a link to the RFI has been included within the chat. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay.
Where do
Is there an individual category 1? Please remember to mute your mic if you're not speaking. Shannon Ames.
Hi, I also signed up. Sorry. Okay. I also signed up for 2 minutes. Does this count against that, or can I do this in addition?
You can do this in addition.
Okay, great. My only point on this one is that, so I'm Shannon Ames. I'm from the Low Impact Hydropower Institute, and I am a member of a coalition that put together the 21st Century Dams Act. And the creation of Section 247, as well as the additional funding in 242 and 243 came directly out of that effort. So I want to underscore that the intent of the statute should be considered when implementing the program. And in regard to definition of capital improvement, it just really needs to make sure that it is inclusive and doesn't seek to limit. And a specific example to that is if a project at an existing FERC projects often have multiple dams. And in that case, if it is in the best interest of the project to apply for these funds to increase fish passage, which would be in the environmental section, that dam removal is a qualified activity under that. And it should be, if you're building a fish passage, for example, removing a dam is part of that process. So I just flag that as an example of making sure that these definitions are as inclusive as possible and don't seek to limit the activities. Thanks.
Thank you for your input. Any other attendee like to provide feedback on category 1? Josh Peterson.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually write a letter as well for this. My name is Josh Peterson with Dakota County, Minnesota, doing one hydro facility. I would just make a comment that we should not be, or I guess we should be looking at timing on projects. I know a lot of people have projects that are in the works, and I think this qualifies for both 243 and 247, but really, there's probably a lot of owners out there that actually have projects either in preliminary design stages. Some projects maybe are in full design stages. Maybe some of them are in the middle of construction right now. I would offer that we do not preclude projects that are in mid phases to request funds through these programs for those projects, or maybe even being retroactive for those funds as well towards past activities done during those projects. Obviously, there has to be a delineation point for past projects and past work completed, but I think you have a lot of owners here that if you require this to be, it has to be a brand new project, or it has to be, at some certain phase of the project, you might preclude a lot of owners here that are already well through the planning process. So.
Okay. Do we have any other? Thank you for your input, Josh. Do we have any other comments or questions regarding Shannon's comment or Josh's comment? Dustin Hires? Dustin, go ahead. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm curious about the restriction to only FERC regulated dams. Could that be extended to the state regulated dams as well?
Okay. We won't be able to comment on that at this time, but we will take your input down for consideration.
All right, thank you.
Are there any questions regarding or comments regarding Dustin's feedback? Robert Lightfoot?
Yes, Robert Lightfoot. I've been Chief Controls Engineer for a hydro facility here in Dalton, Mass. for the last 18 months. Just getting my feet wet in hydropower. But when I saw that capital improvement was limited to the FERC boundary, the first thought that entered my head was that exclude the data center and or some of the monitoring and command and control facilities that are in our case, several miles removed from the dam project itself from being considered as capital improvements, especially since we're considering some cybersecurity improvements that would affect our command and control of the hydro facility.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, we have feedback from Clark Bishop.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, just want to maybe piggyback on Dustin's comment. Just maybe a question. I mean, so are all non-federal facilities that have been authorized outside the FERC licensing process? And I realized there was some additional language around, those permits that were issued prior to June 10th, 1920. But, for those projects that have been authorized outside the FERC licensing process since 1920, I mean, are they simply out of luck here or just completely ineligible for funding through these programs? I mean, I'm thinking specifically, I'm biased here. I work with Reclamation, but we have our own Lease of Power privilege process and non-federal permitting process for hydro facilities cited on reclamation projects. And yeah, I'm just curious to know if those Lease of Power privilege facilities specifically would be ineligible for funding through these programs. And if not, I mean, I would certainly advocate that they be eligible if there's that opportunity there. Thank you.
Okay. Clark, back to your question. All I can say is the statute's pretty clear that you have to have a FERC license or be grandfathered for 247. The statute is silent with respect to 243. That's all I can say.
Great. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate that.
Okay. Do we have any other feedback? Again, we're not taking questions within the chat. However, we will consider them.
Hi, this is Joel Herm from Current Hydro. Is there a minimum dollar amount that would be considered a capital improvement?
No.
Thanks.
Cheryl?
Hi, this is Cheryl Lotch with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Many grants across the nation are only applicable when applicant is in good standing. I'm wondering if any of these requirements would require good standing provisions as opposed to trying to address violations or other types of compliance issues.
Cheryl, I believe the statute does talk a little bit about, particularly with the dam safety provisions, that some of the things that we get will probably be in response to compliance issues with respect to dam safety. So right now we haven't put anything in the guidance about your standing with FERC or your FERC license. So anyway, appreciate your comment there though.
Do you have any other feedback specific to category 1? In the definition. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, we have already received a few comments on timing of funds. Do we have any other input on timing of funds or collaboration with FERC? Robert, I see that you have your hand up. Is your hand raised from earlier, your earlier comment? Daniel Parker?
Hi, yes, Daniel Parker, Alden Research Lab in Holden, Massachusetts. And related to the timing of the funds, would there be a deadline for expenditure of the funds after award?
Sorry, Daniel, I'm having a difficult time hearing you.
Is this any better? Hello?
Okay, that's better.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, it's very low, but I can hear you.
Okay, would there be a deadline by which funds have to be expended after award? I'll put it in the chat.
The question was, will there be a deadline?
Yes, by which the funds have to be spent.
By which the funding has, no, it's funded until expended.
No, no.
But
Once
the-
you make
the-
once you make an award, will there be a time limit by which the funds have to be spent?
Oh, once awarded, so
Yes.
that will be determined in creating the guidance. So.
Thank you.
And again, we're not taking questions specifically. Thank you. Carl Atkinson.
Hi, Tim and Lucy. This is Carl Atkinson with Voith Hydro. Just on the timing of funds, certainly you've identified the preliminary engineering, detailed engineering, procurement, et cetera. Just from a timing standpoint on utility level projects in that kind of category, I would say you're looking at, from more or less an award to commissioning. You could be looking at you could be looking at 2 to 3 years, depending on the type of technologies involved. Once you get into some of these more environmental topics with the types of runners and different construction, you could certainly be looking at least 3 years on procurement to commissioning for those kinds of projects involving the power units themselves. This is not referring to the civil projects that might involve other forms of fish passage, but certainly there is an extended lead time associated with large capital projects on the power generating equipment for these hydro stations. So do please take that into account as you go through your rulemaking and evaluation.
Thank you, Carl. Are there any other questions on category 1, general? Or I'm sorry, any other feedback? Okay, next slide, please. At this time, we will take a quick break. We will be returning at 2:13, and we will see you in a few moments. We have the next slide, please. So this next portion of the listening session will focus on section 243, the Hydroelectric Efficiency Improvement Incentives Program. This program focuses on hydropower facilities efficiency by at least 3%. And this category within the RFI focuses on program design, eligible efficiency improvements, and validation of efficiency improvements. Can we have the next slide, please? So this first portion of the feedback session for 243 will have the pre-registered individuals provide their 2-minute statements, and then we will move on to the general public feedback. So the first person that we have on our list is Kim Letke. Do we have Kim? Kim Letke. Okay. Anne Sibrey. Do we have Anne Sibrey? Okay. Peter Ayula. Okay, let's move forward with Randy Iverson. believe Randy is here. Randy Iverson?
Yes, I'm here.
Randy?
Yes, I just had a question, and that was, do any of these policies apply to private individuals who are running their own hydroelectric system?
Specific to 247, I would say most likely not.
Well, 247, you have to have a license from FERC. Section 243, which is our subject now, it is silent about that.
Silent about what?
About whether or not you need a license from FERC.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Next, we have Mohammed Saleh.
Hello?
Mohammed?
Hello?
Hello.
Go ahead.
How are you? I'm Mohammed Saleh from Egypt.
I'm sorry?
I am Mohammed Saleh from Egypt.
Okay. And would you like to make your 2-minute statement?
Yes. I can start now. You hear me well?
Yep. Go ahead.
I think, in my opinion, in the development of that leads to the production of hydropower anywhere will be the first historical development in hydropower field that will change the nature of human activities on the earth. In our company, in 2009, we have paid all attention to the nature water potential energy, not the kinetic energy, which is equivalent to the enormous sun energy, which evaporizing the surface of the oceans. Such huge energy source, the potential energy of water, of natural water, humans cannot so far naturally fully utilize it. And by the end of 2016, the company, in our company, the research development team innovated stand-alone hydropower planet, enabling us to fully utilize the natural water potential energy and convert it into unlimited motive power anywhere. This motive power can generate it anywhere worldwide. No matter with the weather or and terrain. The point of operational improvements for existing planets, hydroelectric planets, is eligible for planet optimization according the parameters of water intake, like quantity of water and speed of water. If DOE consider the innovative stand-alone hydropower planet as a mechanical and technological improvement for overall facility efficiency, it will give the opportunity to prepare the desired water quantity and speed for 100% performance hydroelectric planets, which may power with any power capacity. Such a process will exclude the natural places, so prevent environmental impact of traditional planets that beside them failures and accidents that may affect populated areas located downstream of the dam. In this situation, DOE have justified opportunity to limit eligibility for incentive payments to only efficiency improvements that include specific project component like turbines and generators inside the hydroelectric. typically associated with the electricity generation. Although DOE will allows the availability of upgrading planets to have variable or just or adjusted speed drives, also alter the ability of those units to meet different kinds of demands. I would like to say the United States and its values and principles and what it offers to serve the humanity. And
Thank you, Mr. Saleh. I'm sorry, your 2 minutes is up, but thank you.
Okay. I put this statements in file, PDF file in our in my account, and I send it for you now.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of thanks.
Thank you.
Next, we have, as part of the pre-registered prepared general statements, Sam Payne. Sam? I believe that Sam is today. Do we have Sam Payne?
Yeah, hello.
Yep.
Hello.
There you go.
Okay, good. Hi, I work in Southern New Hampshire in hydropower. We have fairly small sites, around 900 kilowatts, slightly larger. And I just wanted to state our support for both of these programs. They really, really help when we're starting up. In particular, we tend to buy sites that have not run in a long time and fix them up. 2 specific comments for 243 is in terms of validating efficiency. In one case, 5 years ago, we bought a site that hadn't run in 6 years and had never run particularly well because it had inherent problems. We since ironed them out. So we show a great deal of improvement in generation, but whoever was validating it would need to spend, I don't know how the validation is going to work because there wasn't a consistent good energy production data available to begin with because the site had never properly run. So, you know, we would be, with that particular site, we would be interested in knowing how we would overcome that. We could extrapolate numbers, but there aren't good numbers there. And then the second comment I had was, if the DOE should limit eligibility to only certain efficiency improvements, and we would hope that you would keep it as broad as possible, because, you know, after all, water is flowing through a fairly complicated system, and something like replacing, you know, rusted metal racks, steel racks with stainless racks with a different profile or a slightly different rack width can make a huge efficiency improvement. So I know that that was listed as one of the, that's part of the intake, but anyway, we would hope that that would stay as open as possible. And again, this is a great help, in particular to small projects where we have the same amount of infrastructure, well, the same amount of equipment is required to generate power as a large project, although obviously the scale is completely different, but we tend to be, you know, just a few people trying to make it work. So this kind of thing's great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we are entering the public feedback period. Please limit your feedback to 2 minutes. Next slide. Oh, sorry. There we go. Okay, and we will take the first hand raised, which is Daniel Kennedy.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Yes, I just quickly reiterating what Sam said. These are great programs and they're desperately needed for, you know, small projects, opportunities to improve efficiency. I consult with Earth by Design. We operate in Canal, in FERC. We operate with conduit exemption, but they're licensed in their QFs. One of the things I noticed on the 243 specifically was that it is limited to a 30% payment on the capital improvement. Questions that I think will come up and will be vital to potentially everyone, so hopefully I'm verbalizing this well for the group, is, are these going to be payments that in traditionally DOE style come after the fact and it's out of pocket first? We need to be able to plan accordingly. I'm not sure. I think 30% is a good number depending on the type of capital improvement. If I'm replacing a tremendous amount of conduit, that might be grading me that incentive. It might be far more costly than, say, I'm coming in and I'm replacing controllers, or I'm replacing, runners in a turbine. Could be substantially differently more impactful to certain types of improvements versus other improvements. So just my summary of that is potentially revisiting the 30% as it pertains to which type of capital improvement, and or the addition of other grants that could complement and assist in those capital improvements. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you, Daniel. All I would say is 30% is in the statute as a maximum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Randy.
Yes, I had a question about hydro energy through ocean tides. I live in Alaska. We have tides of over 23 feet vertical change. That's a huge amount of energy. And are any parts of this Energy Policy Act going to deal with that type of hydroelectric energy?
All the statute says for section 247 is you must have a license from FERC. However, for 243, the statute is silent.
So there's no mention of ocean tidal energy.
There is no mention of those specific words, no.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, did you still have a comment that you wanted to make as part of the general feedback? Okay, let's move on to Brian.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so my name is Brian Hickey, and I'm with the Bradley Lake Project, which is located on Kachemak Bay in South Central Alaska. And just as a little bit of background, it's one of the large, it's a 123 MVA dual unit hydroelectric project with a FERC license. And it operates on the Rail Belt grid, which is a small isolated interconnection that spans about 700 miles from Homer, Alaska to Delta Junction in the interior. One of the challenges that we have with the Bradley project is project-owned transmission that limits the ability to move energy from the project into the grid. And so I think from our perspective, it would be helpful if the energy efficiency as well as the 247 section on grid resiliency allowed for project-owned transmission improvements that increase either the capacity or energy deliverability of the project. And further, on a second note, perhaps not excluding diversions, which, for example, in this region, the 3 hydroelectric projects that we have, two of which are FERC licensed, have are Lake and Penstock hydro, and they operate at between 40 and 50% capacity factor. So diversions that could move more water into the reservoir and allow and increase the actual capacity factor of the project, hopefully could be considered as energy improvement or as energy efficiency improvement for the project, in that you're more efficiently using the invested capital that you have in the existing plant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carl?
Sorry about that. So again, Carl Atkinson with Voice Hydro. Under 243, the key criteria appears to be the increase in efficiency, operational efficiency. And I simply wanted to encourage the rulemakers here to utilize as broadly as possible the published test codes, but not simply the ones that are used here in the US, because there's some crossover and sort of cross utilization. So I'd strongly recommend the ASME, the IEC, and the IEEE test codes be utilized for those efficiency measurements, and that you strongly consider relative efficiency improvement measurements as opposed to simply absolute measurements. The relative efficiency is actually what you're trying to determine in a comparison of existing units to updated or upgraded units. And those tests tend to be far more streamlined and far more reliable, because you're doing the same thing on the original as you are on the updated unit in order to gain that efficiency delta across the improvements that you've made or capital improvements that you've made. So strongly recommend that relative approach as well, but they're all defined in those test codes from ASME, IEEE, and IEC. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Brandon Krause?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Barely.
I'm Brandon Krause from Oglethorpe Power Corporation. For units that have previously been upgraded that may have already fairly high efficiency levels, would the DOE consider capacity increases as part of this section? For instance, shifting the performance curve of your unit so that you would maintain the high efficiencies that you already have, but be able to output higher megawatts. So for instance, going from maybe 345 megawatts to 365 megawatts, or something of that sort. Thank you.
That's an interesting perspective. Thanks.
Next, we have Robert Lightfoot.
Yes, I just have to say, when I saw 243, I wished I'd held off on some of the improvements I've made in the last 18 months to start with. But I'd also say that line item 1 there, considering things such as automated raking processes for intake rakes and automatic and remote monitoring and restart. We had quite a few gains at our site when we put in cameras and remote restarts, rather than requiring operators to walk to the turbine to initiate a restart. And we gained quite a bit there. And also, it's not just 3% more kilowatts, but 3% more kilowatt hours would be my take on what does an increase in efficiency mean. We want more power out. And in the best of worlds, we have SCADA data to prove that 3%. I know for my particular application, we've got production data going back 9 years. So we know if we make an increase or not.
Thank you.
Suzanne Grissel.
Hi, I apologize in advance if I start coughing on the tail end of something here, but I've got several comments related to 243, and I hope I'm making them in the right spot. One of them I probably should have mentioned earlier when we were talking about the definition of capital investment. I think most like IRS definitions of capital investment assume the costs of like labor and installation of capital property, but I just toss that out there as something to make sure is included. And then I don't know if we've got a separate time you want to talk about like definition of facility, but I think that might be an important thing to consider. There's a couple of different ways to look at it. I think when you've got an individual unit where you're doing an efficiency gain, a 3% efficiency gain or greater could definitely be struck by that unit individually. But then when you would look at it as part of a say, very large hydro project, that wouldn't necessarily create an efficiency gain for the full project. So I think in order to be as inclusive as possible, you would want to think about defining that facility around individual units. On the other hand, I'm also a board member of NHA. I've heard folks talk about how they may want to combine a variety of efficiency gain projects to meet that 3% efficiency gain. So I think kind of being as flexible and broad-minded as possible on the definition of facility would be helpful. Another thing just to think about is, especially with all these supply chain issues, I think, one thing, we do have some material on site already, for example, and others may as well. I don't know if, if that's going to exclude us from participating. Like if we have material on site that might not meet all domestic content requirements, that we still have a lot of rehabilitation or some, to do and labor to do that would meet those requirements. I don't know how DOE is going to kind of potentially be able to sift through that, because I don't think you want to exclude all projects that may have just planned ahead in procurement, but then still have a lot of work to do. So that's my input for that program. Hope it's helpful.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Next, we have Daniel Kennedy.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry. I just wanted to jump on one more time and be very brief with it in regards to the numbered items on here. Number one is the question of what type of capital improvements are needed. Again, I think that comes to everybody's question is we need to define what the 3% operational improvements are going to be, how they're going to be measured. As previously mentioned, SCADA, we also have options of engineers who can come in and just certainly qualify or quantify a number who are qualified to do the work. How might the DOE validate these improvements? I think just cover that. Number three, the question that or one of the big comments I have here is about limiting eligibility for incentive to certain project components. We have turbines, we have turbine generators, we have generators, we have hydraulic power units, we have braking units, we have controller arms, we have, equipment on every side of the project within the FERC boundary, within the powerhouse, within the operations. We have pipeline, we have intake gates, and as previously mentioned, automatic trash racks systems. The point being that if the DOE's goal is to increase this efficiency and improve this hydropower across the spectrum, the goal that we want to accomplish is giving everybody an opportunity to find a way to increase and improve that efficiency. So being open to the idea of it is a capital improvement. It has to, be on the existing capital infrastructure, but, increasing the size of your walls or reinforcing your walls in a powerhouse is not an improvement. But we do want to make sure that, we leave that door wide open with a broad brush. Then the number four, should the DOE consider other capital improvements? I don't know, but I think that's where that broad approach would come in and be more applicable to this. And then on number five, you asked about what approaches that come in that have been best. Very briefly on the section 242, they work very hard. They don't have a set formula of forms, that you would fill out. But they review every project. I know they're overwhelmed right now, and I know they're just working super duper hard. But more than writing this as a grant, and I have written a lot of grants, it would be nice if we had more of a standardized, what is your efficiency now? What is the proof of that efficiency? What is your proposal? What is the proof of that proposal's outcome? And if it is just very black and white, it makes it easier for everybody from large scale hydro to small hydro to individuals to be able to say, look, I have a set kind of formula. And I know that that might be a lot of work on the DOE's part, but just something to consider. And those would be my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Jeff?
Hey, Tim. Hey, Lucci. Just wanted to say and point you to the FERC on the validation question, point you to the FERC guidance document for for certifying projects for efficiency improvements and capacity additions under the tax credits, under the current tax credits. I don't necessarily think that should be the only way that perhaps a validation scenario is developed by the office, by the department, but it might be one of several different options that you could look at in terms of gaining some insight as to how past agencies have tried to validate efficiency improvements in the hydropower space. There are obviously going to be some differences because there are some different requirements under the tax code than under this program, but I think it is an example to look to.
Thanks, Jeff.
Are there any other individuals that would like to provide feedback on 243? Ryan Grondin.
Hi, Lucy. Feedback that I would give is if the DOE can consider when they issue the guidance for this is how it would be applied when an investor-owned utility seeks a Public Service Commission approval for a capital investment, and if that grant would offset that, or kind of how that would work.
Thank you. Is there another individual that would like to provide feedback? Okay, we will take a short break then. Thank you. We will now move forward with the listening session. This next portion of the session will focus on 247, the Maintaining and Enhancing Hydroelectricity Incentives Program. Again, this program focuses on improving grid resiliency, improving dam safety, as well as environmental improvements. Next slide, please. So we will start out again with registered prepared general statements and then move on to the public general statements. So first we have Shannon Ames. Shannon?
Thank you for the opportunity. Again, Shannon Ames, Low Impact Hydropower Institute, and a member of the coalition that basically got this statute written and put into the bill. So I think intentions are important, and that's what I'm trying to share today. And Section 247 was created to ensure that, important projects that address dam safety, add to grid resiliency, and enhance environmental protection, but don't result in generational increases, which is what makes it different from 243 and 242. Making sure that these projects receive incentives so the projects have the ability to come to fruition, thereby making hydropower operations and river protections enhanced. The statute was intended to fund all qualifying projects, and we'll provide some details on how we think best to ensure that a project qualifies, but want to strongly suggest that the department not attempt to make this program into a competitive grant program, which was not the intention of the statute. Understand the potential limitations of the amount of money available, and we will address that in written comments. But again, just want to underscore, especially given that Director Robinson in her introduction did put an emphasis on the grid resiliency section and the fact that this 247 will be administered under the Grid Deployment Office. We just want to make sure that you're very careful not to put your thumb on any of the categories. They were meant to be equal, and we hope that that comes through. Finally, the statute in each of the categories says including, which meant that those listed activities were examples. So please make sure that those examples don't become the limitation and the only things that are eligible, but they are examples of what could be included. So just make sure to be as inclusive as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Randy Iverson. Let's see.
I think I'm out of comments. The only thing that I would like to have included in these policy acts would be, again, power from ocean tides, TIDES. There's a tremendous amount of energy that can be gained from the ocean moving back and forth. And so I think that should be included in the Energy Policy Act of 2005. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Carl Atkinson.
Hi, Lucy, Tim, thank you again. From a statement standpoint on 247, definitely want to say that I believe this is a huge area, particularly in the US for rehabilitation of the existing fleet. There are a great number of technologies available to help support both the grid resiliency and the environmental performance improvements surrounding lots of different aspects, both from the runner standpoint, the governor and the various oil inventories around the facilities, fish passage, both upstream and downstream, although mostly downstream with the power unit equipment. And then certainly on grid resiliency, the performance characteristics of both the runner, the generator, and even potentially some of the balance of plant equipment in exciters, governors, switch yards, transformers, et cetera. All of those are certainly areas where a project work could be brought to bear to improve both grid resiliency and capability of those facilities in a more flexible way to support the grid, as well as to improve environmental areas. One area that might be a little bit vague may be around just operations of certain plants where there are riparian impacts to the downstream waters and riverbanks and so forth. Some units can be replaced in such a way as to improve the ability of those units to not create those high fluctuations in river levels or water levels, and to improve those environmental conditions downstream. That may be an area that's a little bit obscure, but maybe worth considering as well in this evaluation. So definitely look forward to submitting written comments on some of the other technologies, and thank you for the time to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
We have Sam Payne next.
Hello?
There you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yep. I, again, as a, somebody who's some part owner operator in multiple plants in small plants in southern New Hampshire, we're mostly rehabilitating and getting old mill dams back online. And we run into primarily rotting steel and rotting concrete when it comes to the structure, which has some effect on the efficiency of the site, but primarily doesn't. And this would do a whole lot to help get through the amount of money you have to put up front to get the thing back online again. And it's quite exciting. Included in this, though, I would encourage you to include, somehow limit repairs also to powerhouses, roofs, the covering for all of the switchgear and turbines, and I mean, not turbines, but turbines in some cases, and generators, because that's often severely degraded here in the Northeast. Most of our sites are 100 years old, maximum, 30 is the youngest we have. So we're constantly running into structural repairs that don't have direct efficiency impacts. I know it says maintenance or upgrade of spillways or other appurtenant structures. Perhaps a better definition of appurtenant structures would help, to deliberately include penstocks, for example. And because later on, floodgates, waste gates are included, which is very nice. And then when it comes to resiliency, we typically automate the sites, and they're typically unautomated, which has both an efficiency impact and a resiliency impact, because it allows us to react a whole lot easier than a local operator coming in and increasing output once a day, where we have a computer sitting there measuring the pond level and increasing output as soon as it changes, or decreasing. So yeah, those are my thoughts. And once again, thanks. It's very exciting.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. Concludes the registered prepared general statements. Next slide, please. Now we are moving on to the public feedback portion of the 247 topic. Next slide, please. So this covers specifically category, A, prioritization and distribution of funds within 247. So we will start to take comments. Again, please limit your comments to 2 minutes. We will hear from Brian Hickey first.
Good afternoon here in Alaska, anyway. Almost afternoon here. Thanks again for the opportunity to comment here, and I just wanted to reemphasize the sort of the unique nature of the Bradley project and its integration into the rail belt grid, which is a very loose interconnection that's transient stability limited. The project itself is actually a 123 MVA project, but it's limited to operation at 90 megawatts, primarily due to losses, which I talked about in 243, and the stability limit of the project transmission lines that move the project's energy off the Kenai Peninsula and north to the participants beyond those down on the Kenai. So I think that if there could be an inclusion in the grid resiliency aspect of this to improvements in stability margin, I think that would be a worthwhile transmission improvements that lead to an improvement in stability margin. That would be very helpful for us. The project itself has been plagued with both small signal instability problems as well as transient stability and problems since its commissioning in 1992. So anything that we can do to move the transmission side of this, as long as they're project-owned assets, under the grid resiliency aspects of 247, it would be helpful to us in our sort of unique circumstances here in the rail belt. And thank you again for the opportunity to comment.
Okay. Next, we have Daniel Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you. Just going through the line items, is what are some of the ways to prioritize the funding in these 3 different terms? Honestly, that's a complex question, because I think all three of these sections would have equal weighted value depending on their impact. There's things that we can do to our transmissions, to our switch yard point of interconnection, and to our buried cable that could massively, provide more stability to the grid in the areas where we're located. At the same time, like for environmental impacts, there are definitely things that we can do for water control and quality. There are things that we can do to help reduce, like for instance, the Pacific Northwest, where we suffer right now some water loss and some water issues. There are things that we can do with the additional help and support, and we can work with irrigation districts, water districts, and things like that for a joint project that would actually increase, stabilize the water, stabilize the impact it has on the aquatic life. So just once again, painting with a broad brush these possibilities, and that one being a much more wide open category on, what is the impact that we're searching for, and a definition of what kind of impact, you want to see, more than just a question of what will you do, what will the impact be. As far as the type of payments, I think it is fair to say that everybody who's trying to do capital improvements or any sort of improvement, it's always about money up front. It's always about scheduling contractors. It's always about having the funds available. One of the great programs the DOE had that I really appreciated was the Advanced Hydro Development Grant. Was amazingly well run, and it offered an opportunity to do on a long term, something that would last 3 to 4 years to get completed, to do, to submit invoices, receive payments, receive funding as we went along to the project based on a finite amount, specific goals that have to be met, and qualifications of those goals in advance. That's it. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Jeff?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to sort of reiterate some of the comments that we heard from Daniel and earlier from Shannon with regards to prioritization. As I think was mentioned, all of these categories are very important and I think equally important, and important to different asset owners for different reasons. And the statute didn't provide any sort of direction with regards to the need for DOE to be prioritizing and sort of making value judgments across categories or within categories, types of activities within categories. So I think we would encourage, or at least I would encourage the DOE to consider whether or not quote unquote prioritization is needed. And this is more of a program that supports all eligible activities that come in and that apply. I also think that potentially creates doing some sort of cross comparison between categories of projects or within categories of projects is going to create a tremendous amount of additional work for the review process by the department, and potentially could slow down significantly the process and therefore the payments. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, sorry, I had one more, and thank you for the follow-up there. It's and I know it's been asked in the comments, but the big question being, there are two sections here, 247 and 243. Will both, the question on everybody's mind is going to be, can I apply or qualify for both? What parts of my project could apply for both or not? And a clarification to that, because one of the things that I mentioned earlier, like grid resilience, okay, I can come in and I can actually do a tremendous amount of work on transmission lines and switch yards, and it would really stabilize our power with the local grid and utility. I could have engineers certify and prove it, but at the same time, it also becomes, whether I want it to or not, it increases the project's efficiency, power output, if you're in that kind of regard. So some of these things are going to cross over. So I think just from my perspective, when I look at this, I'm going to have these million questions: what crosses over, what doesn't, how do I separate out? Yes, if I could be applicable to upgrade the runners in my turbine for improvement in efficiency, could I also be applicable to then say, look, I need to put in X equipment that's going to improve the quality of the water and the quality of the aquatic life that are affected by it. So just those two things that mesh. I'm sorry, just that one last comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments specific to prioritization and distribution of funds? Okay, next slide, please. So now we have moved over to the grid resiliency improvements. Do we have any feedback on section B within section 247, that category? Daniel?
We all know when it comes to the grid resiliency improvements that this is going to involve the power utilities. And it's going to involve a lot of going back and forth with their engineers. It just would be clear that whatever we're doing, whether it's at our switch yard, our switch gear, whether it's in our transmission lines, our point of interconnection, you know, everything we're going to do is going to have to coordinate with these guys. And, you know, I think that they're going to want to have input. They're going to want to be very, very, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How is this helping us? And we need to know whose definition the DOE wants. Just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on grid resiliency improvements? Other feedback? Anyone that has used the chat previously would like to speak at this moment? Okay. Next slide, please. So we are now looking for feedback on dam safety improvements. Jeff?
Just to say that as we talked about in the 243 program with regards to the FERC DHAC office having a system for looking at certification of efficiency improvements, obviously their coordination or some consultation or coordination with FERC D2SI would potentially make sense here. I think that there are other organizations that potentially could be considered, whether they be state dam safety organizations or others. So not to say that FERC is the only one, but obviously there's some coordination that could happen amongst that group and potentially others.
Thanks, Jeff.
Any other feedback pertaining to dam safety improvements under section 247? Daniel?
Just following up from what Carl had said earlier, and I think somebody else mentioned it, because of supply chain issues, because we are having some economic issues, I think whatever, and I know this doesn't start coming through till 2023, depending on what happens when we get through the election, just a consideration for any of these projects might be longer term and might be facing more delays than what other projects would. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Yes, thank you. Jeremy Smoji with Eugene Water Electric Board Public Utility. I was just gonna have a comment to number 3 on this slide and just make a recommendation that some prioritization be allocated towards FERC projects where FERC has remanded the project to go on hold over dam safety issues. It might be a good prioritization avenue for those who are on holding pattern for generating. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carl?
Yeah, Tim and Lucy, again, on section 3 as well. I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't suggest that projects that contribute specifically to improving public safety around existing dams, whether they're hazardous conditions or simply improving safety for recreators and so on. I would think those maybe should have some priority in that discussion, if there is a prioritization to be done. But public safety is what I would suggest.
Thank you. Any other feedback regarding dam safety improvements under 247? Okay. Next slide, please. Now, looking at environmental improvements under section 247. Go ahead, Mohammed. Mohammed? So there might be a technical issue. Daniel Kennedy?
Thank you. Speaking for hydro projects that, are in Run a River, Run a Canal, one of the things that I would like to see, and I do not see it very often, is some sort of support for things like canal lining. I know that can be an expensive request, but if we were working with irrigation districts, water districts for our specific hydropower, because it improves our project, I could, right now, I know one of the projects I have in Oregon, I could literally run just a simple 5 miles of lining upstream. And not only would I save, I could literally be stopping the loss of millions of gallons of water. I'm improving my downstream output, I'm improving the downstream effects, and I'm improving the quality project of the hydropower itself because of the way we can better capture water. Excuse me, a little bit of COVID. I know that's an extreme example, and I don't mean to just throw out an extreme example, but it talks about things about how we improve capital projects in here, and I'm not sure everything for when we're talking about environmental improvement is going to be limited. Should it be limited to my intake? Should it be limited to my powerhouse? Should it be limited to my tailrace? Is there things I can do working with the canals, working with the conduits to improve it overall? Maybe these are outside of the spectrum of what was intended in this legislature, but the whole idea, again, big concern in the Pacific Northwest is water quality, protecting the aquatic habitats and aquatic species. So just something I would love to see considered in this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Hi, Cheryl Latch from Wisconsin DNR again. I think the items outlined as far as water quality improvements, fish passage and such are very common. I'm hoping that kind of building off some of the stuff that Shannon had mentioned earlier, where utilities or hydroelectric owners and operators can collaboratively come together to look at basin planning for drought and climate resiliency or flood resiliency through different types of assessments. Basin-wide planning and hydrologic assessments would be something that could be considered or fit into some of these different boxes or categories, as they are not a strict water quality, they are not a strict single species, they are more of a holistic approach to better management of a resource system.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Let's see, Mohammed, are you still having technical issues?
Are you hearing me now? Hello? Hello?
Go ahead, Mohammed.
Yes. The goal, in my opinion, in this issue is a new ultimate final solving for the problems of traditional hydroelectric power stations, which are mainly in the deterioration of the infrastructure and the environmental effect of traditional hydroelectric power stations. The company achievement is the innovation of a new method to use the water potential energy to generate electrical power or practically ultimate motive power. In my opinion, DOE should divert the incentives program towards installation the new or the low cost potential hydroelectric stations, our innovation at the final parts at the final parts of distribution network of hydroelectric station based on dams to compensate the decrease of power produced by such dams. The accreditation of DOE to install the potential hydroelectric stations as a new power hydropower flexibility technology provide 100% flexibility for traditional hydroelectric power plants and neglected the environmental constraints. The constraints which is costly and hard to be manipulated, and to concentrate on the operational constraints and improve the great resiliency which can manipulate like turbine and generator efficiency in enhancement. And I would like to say the good King company is fully prepared to for a national company mentioned by DOE to work with it, or a new national funded company by DOE to implement these contributions.
Thank you. Jim, how?
Yes, hi, everyone. Thanks all of you at DOE for hosting today. I'm Jim Howe with the Nature Conservancy. We just wanted to weigh in on question number 1 here. If you do get a proposal that looks like it's benefiting one species over another, I'd really encourage you to think about consulting with partners, state agencies in particular, state environmental or fish and wildlife agencies, to help you weigh the merits of that proposal. And I would definitely associate myself with the previous comment about looking for environmental improvements that benefit the whole system rather than an individual species. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you.
Daniel?
Thank you. Sure. I appreciated Cheryl's comment, and I just wanted to follow up. What that kind of got me thinking about, though, is what happens in this particular section 247 if one hydro facility says, look, I can upgrade grid resilience, and it's a substantial improvement. I can upgrade dam safety. It's a substantial improvement. I can make an environmental improvement, just like was mentioned previously, that will benefit multiple species, and it's an overall system improvement. Something to think about is how many people are going to then say, can I only apply once, or can I apply to the separate individual components of this if each one of them can qualify, separately, and then how does that affect the application process? So just that thought.
Thank you, Daniel.
Nathan?
Yes, hi there. I'm with California Outdoors. We're members of the Hydro Reform Coalition. I just wanted to simply say I wanted to second everything that Jim Howe just mentioned as regards to this issue. So that was it. I just wanted to let you know that we certainly support those types of criteria in terms of how to deal with all of this. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you. Any other feedback on environmental improvements within 247? Next slide, please. This provides an opportunity to give us general feedback. So it doesn't necessarily need to be on a specific topic within 247. Jeff?
Thank you. I think one of the things that I hear that industry members are seeking more clarity on is going to be things like DEI, the process for domestic content and the waiver process for that. These 242 and 243 were existing programs, as Tim noted, and never had and were funded through annual appropriations, or hopefully we're going to be funded through annual appropriations in the case of 243. And so there weren't those additional criteria that were included as part of the infrastructure law. So understanding better how they're going to be applied in this context, I think is something that I have heard again, and have also heard that people are also wondering how those requirements, which are substantive, and how compliance requirements in terms of receiving federal money through this program, what those will look like and what they may have to do internally in their processes in order to make sure that they're in compliance if there are such things that are needed, which there may not be.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you. And I know Mr. Welch clarified this in the 243, but you know, there is a 30% cap and it's already written into the legislature. There just might be, again, it's very difficult for a lot of people right now. And we want to see these projects be successful. Whether or not it's working with some of the folks from the environmental group, if it's an environmental improvement that, you know, we can piggyback and support one another in that kind of a possibility, or if it's just for hydropower, and in some areas where the avoided cost rates have been dramatically reduced, and it's not, and you see things like droughts causing you know, really financial harm, the performance increase and the opportunity for a capital cost improvement could keep some projects alive. You know, we're already seeing and I don't know if it's going to happen or if it's already just set in stone. We're already seeing the Klamath Falls Dam going. We're seeing hydropower just being thrown away. And it would just be nice to see, okay, some of these projects, maybe there's something we can do to help balance for some of these folks. And that's just a thought. I don't know how you would approach that or begin to approach it, but that would be my concern for some of these projects that say, I could finally stay alive, I can keep hydropower going, and I can improve my efficiency, but I don't have, you know, $1 million out of pocket just to lay down at the moment in time. So those are just something to consider, and I don't know how you would approach, you know, thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Suzanne? Suzanne, I'm sorry, it's a little difficult to hear you.
You're breaking up, Suzanne.
Hold on, go somewhere else.
Still
Can you hear me better now?
No,
Not really.
only slightly. We'll call Brennan now, and we'll go back to Suzanne. Brennan?
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to make 2 points. DOE might want to consider how a phased application process would work, in which a very simple or reduced first phase of the application might enable applicants to get a quick read on qualification, however you choose to tier that. The second point would be that DOE may want to consider having a first half of the funding in an initial tranche or process here, evaluate what worked and didn't work, and then do a second half in for the remaining funds that are available, so that you could perhaps tune the program in its second half. Thank you.
Thanks, Brennan.
Suzanne? See if we can hear you.
Can you hear me better now?
Yep.
Yes.
Don't move.
Okay, well, we'll try this. Okay, now hopefully you won't get too much background noise, but I just wanted to second what Jeff said from the compliance perspective. And we're in the public power community. We're very compliance oriented, and we don't have a lot of experience taking a lot of different kinds of federal funds. And I think one of the things we're really looking at is just some direction on maybe where to go. I think some agencies have like standard legal contracts, for example, on the back end. You know, once you're actually selected for an award, then there's this whole process on the contract side. And I think that's would be really helpful. I don't know if DOE has something like that already, or if you think you're going to just even know that in advance, like what that contract might look like, what things we just might want to expect to see, so that we can get prepared and just have a better sense of who to go to with questions on the compliance side of things.
Okay.
Carl?
Hi, Tim and Lucy. I don't know if there is precedent for this, but given the complexities of 247 in particular, it may be worth considering one or more advisory panels for the review of the various applications and some of the technical aspects of those. I don't know how DOE is exactly positioned to do those kinds of evaluations, simply to determine, what is the applicability of each application to the specific provisions. But at the end of the day, there may be some value in having an advisory panel involved in that in some way. And I'm certain that the industry, Tim, you know certainly that there's a lot of expertise, not only around the industry, but certainly with the NGOs and the environmental community as well, that could participate in something like that.
Thank you. Any other general feedback on 247? Okay, next slide, please. Category 4, equity, environmental, and energy justice and labor priorities. Are there any general comments on this category? Daniel?
Yes, sorry, just a second. I apologize, this oxygen. Anyway, the question I have is, it would be really nice to see a flat out an example. It just really would, as an applicant, I've come across the equity, environmental, and justice before, and I've read it one way. Some of the coalitions have been in, each individual member read it a different way. So something that is more well defined for us on this end, when we're talking about equity and environmental and energy justice, is this labor, is this people, is this culture, is this community, is this energy, is this a project? Just something that defines it better for us would be one of the things I think would help in the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you. Any other feedback? Okay. Next slide, please. Category 5, expanding union jobs and effective workforce development. Do we have any feedback here? Jeff?
I would just say to you guys that I think you could expect feedback. I think people are probably still working, particularly on these last two categories, aren't as necessarily plugged in as we are to some of the more technical categories, but can expect that you'll get some feedback.
Linda?
Thank you. On behalf of the Hydropower Foundation, I think what you proposed here, I think is extremely important with regard to recognizing the importance of workforce and workforce development issues. One of the greatest issues, however, is creating an industry that is strong. And so these incentive programs, I think, are critical toward that end, because you're not going to be able to attract a new workforce to the industry unless they sense there is real opportunity. So I applaud the creation of these programs. I think they're going to be critically important. Obviously, continuing these types of incentive programs are extremely important for the industry. But one of the things I do want to point out, and I think is incredibly important, is that the department recognizes the critical need for funding of these types of workforce programs. There is not a lot of money out there that supports the types of training necessary for the hydropower industry. It supports community-based organizations or organizations like the foundation. So as you really look at how you're going to implement and promote workforce development within the hydropower industry, you're going to need to look at the types of training programs that have made a difference before, and there are programs out there, and we'll be filing a response to this with regard to what they are. But you also need to understand the need for creating new programs like a hydro veterans programs and things of that nature, and we'll be filing some recommendations with regard to that as well. So I just wanted to point out the need for the new creation of these programs in order for it really to bring in the type of workforce that's necessary. It's going to be a huge, huge opportunity within the hydropower industry because of the number of retirements and people that, you know, there'll be a significant amount of openings, tremendous variety in the types of jobs that will be created as a result of this programs and the new infusion within the hydropower industry, and getting that word out and working to ensure that the types of programs are available to train and prepare these students, and working with the universities is going to be important. So that's all I have to say, but watch for our comments when we file them. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. Any other comments? Feedback? Okay. Next slide, please.
All right, so just to reiterate something I said earlier, just to leave you with the sort of the next steps here with regard to mechanisms to respond to the RFI. The 60-day comment period, we're about halfway right now, and it ends on September 6th, 2022. Both written and oral responses are being accepted. With respect to oral responses, in addition to the ones that you heard today, you can make an appointment for a 30-minute verbal response to the DOE staff member, but that request must be received no later than 5 o'clock Eastern time on Friday, August 19th. And you see the web or the email address that where you send your request. Now, written responses, the traditional method, must be submitted electronically to that WPTO RFI at ee.doe.gov no later than 11:59 Eastern on Tuesday, September 6th. Next slide. So here's our tentative schedule. So our tentative schedule, we are now in sort of the second phase there for both 243 and 247. The July through September area, we are holding our public workshop today on August 9th. So next we move into the third column, the final column for FY 22, and that's preparing the guidance. So once we receive the feedback from the RFI, we'll begin to put together the draft guidance. Now here's where we depart a little bit with both things running perfectly in sync together. We will give some priority to our 247 guidance so that we can get that out for public comment. We will continue to work on the 243 guidance, however, and we will be requesting comment in January, March 2023. So we're hoping with 247, by giving it some priority, we'll be able to issue our final guidance and open our solicitation in the spring. Then begin reviewing applications in the spring and then late early summer issuing payments. And so again, 243, a little bit more behind, but we will give both 243 and 247 our utmost attention. But we really wanted to get the 247 guidance out as soon as we possibly can. Any questions there on our schedule? Okay, so just, the process for applying for the incentives. Hopefully we'll have guidance that's very clear to everyone. So I would encourage everyone to read the published guidance thoroughly and in its entirety. The incentives that are for qualified hydroelectric facilities as defined in the guidance, which will be based on the statute. You need to submit an application addressing all the requirements in the guidance and provide supporting documentation. And of course, you must submit before the application deadline. So wanted to say a little bit here about our payment steps. I know there's a lot of questions about the accounting principles that DOE is using. We're in the process of consulting with our general counsel about those principles with respect to, really what are these incentives and how does DOE handle these incentives? Do they handle them a little bit differently as they might handle financial assistance? So, but one thing we do know is this is sort of the mechanics for how you would get your award. This will probably be in the guidance anyway. This is sort of based on our section 242, which we've been running since 2014. So just to go through this relatively quickly, I'll turn it over to Corey.
Thanks, Tim. As Tim was saying, we're basing off the qualification processes and the financial compliance requirements similar to 242. These incentives are a unique funding mechanism for DOE, so they kind of fit into their own niche. But basically, the steps that we do know are likely going to qualify would first, you need to obtain your tax ID number. This is something that all federal recipients would need to do, as well as registering your entity into the SAM account system, or the System for Award Management. Lastly, if you actually want to receive your payment, you need to register with the VIPER system, the Vendor Inquiry Payment Electronic Reporting System. These are all our basic steps just to go through to receive those federal funds and those federal dollars. Once again, this is based off of our 242 process that we have put in place. If there are more financial procedures or processes that will be required, as Tim said, we'll be updating those details in the guidance and list those there once it's released. Tim?
Okay. Are there any final questions before we go? Okay. Oh, one more. Nathan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Quick question. Requesting a 30-minute verbal opportunity to meet with your staff. I'm assuming that we could do that, and then also after that, as long as it's in time, submit written comments. Is that the case?
Of course. Yep.
Okay.
You can use all three methods.
And thanks for everything, by the way. Appreciate all this.
You're welcome. And thank all of you for joining us today. And again, we'll leave this slide up for a few minutes here. These are the important deadlines that are coming up. So again, thank you. We will be putting out the guidance for both 243 and 247 out for public comment. And so this won't be the last you'll hear of us. So anyway, once again, thank you very much.